Proton Pack is not a toy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Proton Pack is Not a Toy. My name is Matt, and this is episode 11 of the Venkman conversion, where I'm taking my Proton Pack, changing up some details to make it look more like the Ghostbusters 2 version of the Venkman Hero Pack. And this episode is going to be devoted to the particle thrower or neutrino wand or proton gun, whatever you call the business end of the Proton Pack. That's what we're talking about today. Since I uploaded the last episode on YouTube last week, I've been using pretty much all of my spare time working on this. When I first started planning for this whole conversion process, I did not include overhauling the thrower as something that I expected to do. But that's exactly what I've done over the last week. I knew I had a few changes that I needed to make here and there, but as I dug more into the reference photos and found things that just weren't quite right, and was just kind of overlooking the quality of my build from when I first made it in 2014, I knew that it was time to kind of start over on it and rebuild it from the ground up. So it ended up getting sanded, all the aluminum repainted, and put back together. And then the changes that needed to be made to match the Venkman were made in that process. Start off, I'm just going to tell you the things that I changed, just to kind of get those out there based on the reference photos that I was using. One of the things that I knew going in that I was going to have to change was the heatsink. In Ghostbusters in 1984, the Hero Packs, the heatsink was pretty sharp on the edges, and so was the one that I had here on my pack. Between the first two movies, by the time Ghostbusters 2 came out, they had sanded or ground the edges down enough to where they would not be sharp and pointy, and even more so on the semi-hero packs that were built for Ghostbusters 2. One of the things I noticed when I was looking at the reference photos of the edges was that the heroes and semi-heroes were mounted differently on the heatsink as well. The heroes are mounted from the inside and the semi-heroes from the outside. And as the semi-heroes have 4 socket head cap screws, 1 in each corner, the heroes only had 2 diagonal from each other. So the Venkman has one in the top left and the bottom right. And so when I rebuilt it, that's how I did it, and I left the other 2 holes open. So that was a surprise when I was looking at the reference photos. Another change that I made was to the rear grip. I added these 1/8 inch rivets instead of this rounded off socket head cap screw. If you can see that I originally had in there. So it's about the same size, about the same shape, and the head on it right there with the hole and the cap there. Pretty similar, and so it was a good stand-in for years, but I had the tool now to put the rivets in there, so I felt it was time to do it. To choose that size, I used a photo that showed the back of the grip in the same photo as the back of the power cell, and I realized the perspective is might be a little off with the angle from the camera, but it does appear that the ones in the grip were smaller than the ones in the power cell. So I went one size down from what I have in my power cell and put those in the grip, and they fit just right. Another thing that I changed was originally on my pack I had these Nycoil banjos here on the gun ear and on the end of the trigger tip, and I traded those out for GB Fans replica Legree banjos. And as I was looking at photos right before I started doing this video, just double checking something, I did notice that the one the actual prop on the gun ear, there is a little red sleeve around here on that one. So I don't know if that's just a different version of the Nye coil than the one I have, because it's not the same size of the little red insert here, or if it's a different version of the Legree, but that is a difference between the two when you look at the actual prop. So that might be something that I update later on when I do a little bit more research or I get some more feedback on that. But as of right now, that's what I'm going with, the two Legree banjos, replacing the Nyquil ones that I had on there. On the side over here, these discs, the side discs, I actually had these sanded, repainted, mounted back on the thrower before I realized, hey, I need to double check to see if the knurling or non-knurling is the right one for the hero packs, because the ones that I had on here were the ones with the knurling on them. And then, as it always seems to be, when I do go back and double check, the way I have it is different from the way it needs to be. So mine had knurling, the hero doesn't, and the knurling is actually on the semi-hero packs, and so that's why there's a difference. So Ghostbusters 2, if you're building a semi-hero pack, the knurling would be correct. But if you're building a hero from either movie, then no knurling. So I just took those, went out to the garage, and sanded off all the knurling, went back and repainted them, and then reinstalled them on the side there. On the bottom here on the gun track, when I was looking at reference photos, I did notice that the way I had it was a little different. And what I was looking at more was this one label that I replaced here on the gun track. That's the only label I've done so far. But I noticed that this washer that I've had on there for years didn't look to be quite the right size. It looked too big. And I was thinking, man, that disc over here looks to be more the right size. And I thought maybe it was underneath the washer. And I took it off. It wasn't. I got to thinking, I have a bag of parts, and I went and looked, and I had the one that came with my gun track that I bought years and years ago, and I'd never painted it, and it was just sitting in there. It had never been used, and so that looks to be the one that matches what we see on the actual packs. It's flipped upside down and then just held on by socket head cap screw there as well, and holding the S-hook nice and snug there in place. So that was a surprise find as I was actually looking at something else when I was doing the research there on the reference photos. Another thing that I changed was on the front of the gun body right here. There's this nub right here where everything connects from the front handle. And two things here. I did not have this hole here on the top, so I drilled that hole. And then another thing, I did have this brass spacer or washer. It's pretty thick. It's more of a spacer. Some people put stacked little brass washers underneath that one screw there. If you look at the reference photos of the pack now, and I believe if I'm looking at it right from the close-up that we see in the courtroom scene, it does not look like there is any washer or spacer underneath that one socket head cap screw. So I took that off to make that match. And then the other thing that I changed was something that I've never had on this pack, was functionality with the barrel twist. So it can do that now, and I'm thinking about putting in a pop mechanism, thinking about designing and building my own. If I end up doing that, it will be something that I do put here on the channel. It might be something that is more accessible to people and easier for people to have the actual parts and tools, tools I use lightly, on hand, and might be easier. And with that being the case, if I am able to pull it off and get it to work the way I want, I'll put it here on the channel. But as of now, I really don't have the clear tube secured in there the way it should be, and the twist does not, in the movie or on the actual prop, actually cause that to pop in and out. The pop mechanism is based on the green lever here that runs through and comes out on this side over here, and then works its way in the actual gun body. So those are the main things that I noticed on the Hero Pack that differed from my pack that I changed. And then just general maintenance is what it needed when I went over with. So obviously sanded it down, repainted it, used the same Canyon Black paint and primer that I used on the previous video with the HGA and the other parts for my pack. So those colors should match. And I needed to add a few nuts to some of the bolts, especially here on the clipper valve. I had those basically held on just from the tension of the bolt into the body itself, and it was loose on one side, so I found some nuts that would fit on there, and that is held in place and way more secure there. So there's a couple of places like that where I had to secure some things. The trigger box used to be really loose with the instrument bar here, and I've got that set up to be nice and tight now. And the barrel is tighter than it was. I do have a little bit of wobble based on this hole being a little bit too big right here. So kind of coming up with ideas on ways for me to make that work a little better and tighten that up. And overall, it's okay right now. And then I tidied up the interior of the thrower, again with thoughts of maybe putting in a pop mechanism. It doesn't take a lot of room for a pop mechanism, but the wires and these electronics board and like the little flashlight thing lens here at the top for the vent light, that stuff takes up a lot of room. So I tidied it up. I used a lot of zip ties and tape to kind of scoot things over toward the walls, bunch things together, so that if I am able to put a pop mechanism in there, I'll have room for it to operate without catching on anything or breaking any wires or messing anything up. So in general, that's all that I did on that. But as far as process goes, like I said, I did total teardown, pretty much took off every part that I could. There's a few switches and wires that I left in for the repaint process, just because, especially here on the trigger box, these are so hard to get in. I did not want to take them out and then put them back in, because I remember vividly that was not fun when I first did it. And then the rear grip, I guess, is painted on because that would not budge. It's still on there, it's painted. I just painted it with the handle as it is. When I did the teardown, one of the switches on the toggle switches here by the bar graph, I think it was the bottom one. Previously, I had trouble with them kind of turning and not being set where I wanted them to be. So when I'd flip the switch, it would be diagonal instead of up and down. And so I tried to glue the little nuts in place. And when I did that, it bled over not just on the nut, onto the actual toggle switch itself. So here's the one that broke. Just when I was trying to unscrew the nut off of there with all that glue, it just grabbed it and it twisted it at the base and then came apart. So that was unfortunate and one of those dang it moments where I was like, well, I've got to replace a part now. So I went to the Spengler 1984 workbench on Facebook and threw it out there saying, hey, I broke this. Does anybody have one that they're willing to give up, or something that would plug into my GB fan soundboard or electronics kit here? in the thrower, and or know how to fix it. Somebody did post on there that I could just go and buy some from eBay or Amazon that are the right size, that already have the leads on there, and I would just have to add the connector to make it hook into the board. But also in that thread, AJ Quick from GB Fans reached out and said, "Hey, sorry it broke. I'll send you another one." So cool, thanks, appreciate it. And he did. He sent me not one but three, and so I ended up getting basically one for the trigger box and then two here for the main face of the thrower. I did go to the point of putting one of them on there and noticed that over the years since I bought mine, they have changed to a smaller toggle switch. The whole thing's smaller. And I thought about changing out at least the two here on the face, but then I would feel like all three of them needed to be changed. And again, it was so hard to get that one in there. And then they would be loose in the sockets there, so I would have to go back and refill the holes a little bit so that these would fit more snugly, and they would fit, I can tighten them up to where they would stay where I wanted them to go. And these, looking at reference pictures, are probably more accurate to the actual prop. When you look at the prop, they do look smaller compared to the ones that are on mine. Not by a lot, but I mean, there's not a huge difference between the two here. But I made the decision that I wasn't going to use this, because before AJ reached out to me on that thread, I did take that advice and I went to eBay and I bought one of the toggle switches that was the same size that I broke, and it had the leads on it, and so I just grafted it to the connector that came from the one that was broke. So I just snipped that off and then put those wires together, taped them up, and then it works fine now. And so that's the way I have it set up here in the thrower. So thank you to AJ for your great customer service, even though I did not choose to use these. Really outstanding on his part to continue to be one of the unsung heroes in the Ghostbusters fan community. So again, thanks AJ, and I'm sure in the future I am going to find a use for these. So I will definitely hang on to them. So that was one of the parts in the process that I really wasn't looking forward to, is having something break, because something always does, and that was the one that broke on this one. I do have a lot of pictures to show. I want to show you guys. I know that not everybody's going to want to go beyond this point in the video, but basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up now and say thank you for watching. I do have a video coming up next week where I'm anticipating putting on the labels and dry rub transfers and maybe doing some weathering. I might just work on the thrower for that, or I might include the pack as well. If I get the pop mechanism to work sometime in the next week, that might jump in front of the line ahead of the labels and be the next video. But I'm expecting it to be one of the two, so that's what you have coming up in episode 12. And stick around if you're interested in the process videos, and you can watch and see step by step as I took photos, how it went back together, and maybe you'll find it interesting, and you can check that out if you'd like. I do appreciate it if you've made it this far, and thank you again for being loyal to this series. Many of you have reached out and said how much you appreciate it and enjoy it, and I do, as always, appreciate those nice nuggets of positive feedback. Again, thanks for watching. I'll stop talking now. Here's some more pictures of the rebuild process, and I'll see you guys in the next video.